So welcome and thank you for joining us this evening for the second public meeting for Denver Parks and Recreation's Strategic Acquisition Plan. We've taken the input gathered from the community to date to help develop draft recommendations for the final plan. And tonight we're excited to share this phase of the plan with you and get your feedback. Next slide, please. So we'll start with some introductions. I'm Kathy Levesque, Assistant Director of Parks Planning and also co-project manager for the Strategic Acquisition Plan.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Luke McKay. I am the Department of Parks and Recreation's Acquisition and Asset Manager with the Division of Real Estate, and I am the co-project manager of the Strategic Acquisition Plan along with Kathy.
I'm Laura Morales. I do community relations with Parks and Recreation, and tonight I'm acting as Zoom IT.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Geddes. I'm a principal with Design Workshop, a local landscape architecture and planning firm here in Denver. And I am joined by Kylie Peterson, our wizard project manager, who cannot speak right now because she's got some health issues with her throat. So we are happy to be on the team and are looking forward to talking to you today.
Thank you all. Next slide, please. Before we get into the draft recommendations, we wanted to review why Denver Parks and Recreation launched a strategic acquisition plan. This planning effort is directly implementing the Parks Legacy Fund 5-year plan, which came out of the 2018 Parks ballot measure, and Game Plan for a Healthy City. During the community outreach for both of these, we heard that Denver residents strongly believe the Parks and Recreation system needs to grow with the city's growing population and to help address issues of equity and resiliency. Additionally, in support of the Strategic Acquisition Plan, in 2019, Denver Parks and Recreation received a grant from the National Recreation and Parks Association to help close gaps in our park system and help ensure all residents are within a 10-minute walk or roll to a park. In 2020, we hired a real estate acquisition and asset manager to help manage our acquisition program. And also in 2020, we launched the strategic acquisition planning effort. Next slide, please. On this slide, we have the vision statement for the strategic acquisition plan, which captures what the plan will accomplish. The plan will provide a clear framework for decision-making that identifies priorities, describes strategies, and criteria for success for the acquisition program. The framework will ensure Denver's urban and mountain parks, open spaces, and recreation system will equitably meet the recreational needs of the entire community, while also ensuring Denver remains a resilient, sustainable, and healthy city. And with that, I'll hand it off to Chris.
Thank you, Kathy. So as Kathy mentioned up front, we are using the Menti platform to do the survey that goes along with this presentation tonight. So, you know, the Menti site, it will paste the presentation on your phone or on your tablet or on your computer, whichever device you choose to be on. So it'll go along with the course of the presentation. The questions that you'll be asked are going to match the survey questions that are going to be made available to the public following this meeting. So there's no need to take the survey separately. And so this is just a test question to give you all an opportunity to get used to the platform. The question is, please follow the instructions on your screen and do the polling on your phone if possible. Is this working for you? And right now we've got a number of responses, 4 so far. 3 people say yes, and 1 person says, I am not sure. So if you do have an opportunity to please go to that menti.com site, use the code at the top of your screen, 115-5628, and answer that question. We can get good information from this group. All right, I see another response coming in. Up to 7 now. We'll give folks just another 15 or 20 seconds before we move on to the next. It looks like those who have logged in, by and large, do have it working. So.
And Chris, just for the people that have joined on the phone, I'm going to repeat. The website is menti.com, menti.com, and the code is 1115-5628.
Thank you, Laura. All right, Hadley, why don't we move ahead and go to the next slide. So we've been working on this project since about August of 2020. Starting in October, we began a pretty hearty engagement process that has continued through today. So that engagement includes one public meeting that we had in October of last year. We had about 40 attendees with English and Spanish translation similar to this meeting. Following that meeting, we did issue a public survey that was issued in Vietnamese, Spanish, and English. After several months of having that survey open, we got nearly 1,800 responses, which we thought was a wonderful response, great input from the community, and we really got diverse input from the community as well. We made sure that we got this survey out to residents across Denver of all races, classes, to make sure that we're getting a clear picture of the acquisition needs from the entire community. We also have had two rounds of technical focus group meetings and a follow-up survey with those individuals. Technical focus groups are largely members of the Department of Parks and Recreation team who have expertise within the system. And we also had two rounds of meetings with our technical partners who are partners outside of the city generally, who also have expertise with different aspects of the park system. Next slide, please, Sadly. So we are really looking at this plan through two really important lenses. One is equity and one is resilience. The city has done a lot of planning in recent years, including Blueprint, which is the city's comprehensive plan, and Game Plan, which is the Department of Parks and Recreation's master plan for parks. And those equitable and resilient really come up as two important factors for where the community is heading into the future. So in order to equitably meet the recreational needs of all, while also ensuring that Denver remains resilient and sustainable, we are developing criteria that we'll look at here and focus on in the next several slides to help assess acquisition opportunities. Based on what we have heard, acquisitions in all focus areas will apply equity and resilience criteria to make sure that we are meeting Denver's equity and resilience goals. Next slide, please. So I spoke about focus areas. The focus areas that we are studying here were developed as part of the Legacy Fund 5-year planning process that Kathy talked about earlier in the presentation. Most of the future acquisitions, according to this plan, will fall under one or more of these focus areas. Those are listed on your screen. They include equity, the 10-minute walk or roll gap, mountain parks, facilities, resilience, habitat restoration, and waterways, and downtown high density and growth areas. Those focus areas were also reconfirmed through this public engagement process for this acquisition plan. So going through the focus areas and really speaking to each one of these, equity really, again, rises to the top of all city plans. And the goal here with this plan is to proactively invest in neighborhoods in a flexible manner in coordination with other complete neighborhood needs and community benefits. So we're going to go ahead and start talking about, we'll get into more of the meaty questions here, but when we talk about equity, Denver Parks and Recreation uses this neighborhood equity index that really scores neighborhoods based on a number of factors, indices, including communities of color, percent youth, percent low income, health disparity, population density, the 10-minute walk or roll, the park access, capital improvement investment, and acreage of parks per 1,000 residents. Based on what we've heard, from the community during the course of this process, we really should prioritize acquisitions in higher need neighborhoods and communities using this equity index as a guide. So next slide, please. So first question here, parks are part of a complete neighborhood. What other community benefits should be prioritized near or adjacent to parks? And we're asking you to choose your top 3. I'll read those off to you. At the bottom of the screen, we have affordable housing, grocery stores, libraries, schools, medical facilities, community gardens, and recreation centers. So again, what we have heard from the community is, again, equity is a major goal of this plan. And when we think about equity and acquisition of parks lands, thinking about what other needs that might need to be adjacent that really helps serve those communities where we're providing additional park access. So we're getting some good responses in here. I think 12 so far. So please again, introduce your top 3 into this list. Right now we've got affordable housing at the top with about 28%, closely followed by recreation centers and community gardens. One thing that we have heard during this process is that, we want to make sure that as park acquisitions occur, that we're not encouraging displacement of existing communities. And that's why we're talking about, that's why we have this question about complete neighborhood needs and what we might need to prioritize around. So we're getting some good response here, 24% for recreation centers, 22% for affordable housing, libraries at 18%, and community gardens coming in close by. So the next focus area is the 10-minute walk or roll. So the goal here is to provide all residents with parks with a diversity of spaces and amenities within a 10-minute walk or roll. We really want to make sure that as we're talking about this 10-minute walk or roll, we're not only talking about spaces, but also quality spaces. So making sure that people have different opportunities within 10 minutes walk or roll of home or work to access a park space. So question here, as it relates to how we get to parks, rank the following for most important to least important for parks and recreation facilities to connect to. So what's the most important, and this probably shouldn't say least important, but most important to not the most important on this page. So we have safe sidewalks, we have trails or greenways, bike paths, road network or street network, and bus or train or access to transit. So what we're asking you to do is to rank each of these in order from greatest to least need in terms of accessing parks. We're getting some good responses here. Again, the options are safe sidewalks, trails or greenways, bike paths, a road or street network, and bus or train. All right, let's move on to the next question, which is really about the quality and amenity of spaces and amenities. So question here is, which of the following amenities would you most like to see in your neighborhood park? And we're asking you to choose up to 3. So on this list, we have play areas, we have sport courts, open lawn areas, access to nature, gardens, whether pollinator, community, or other, fitness stations, picnic areas, and cultural spaces. Again, this is, once you have gotten to the park through one of the means on the last slide, what do you want to do when you get to the park? And again, choose up to 3. Again, if you do have other ideas that aren't on this list, please go ahead and add those to the chat box as well. So right now we've got access to nature and open lawn areas, as well as gardens being the top 3, all of them at 19% right now. Picnic areas and play areas close behind. So we have everybody about 10 more seconds. All right, and we'll move to the next focus area. All right, the third focus area we're going to talk about is downtown high growth and or high density and growth areas. The map on your screen is from Blueprint, again, the city's comprehensive plan, and shows areas in the darker colors, greens and blacks, that are expected to see high growth in the future. As our neighborhoods see population growth, it's important that the supply of park space supports the additional people that will want to use them. We don't want to overcrowd our open spaces. One thing to note is if you are voting on your phone, you can click and zoom in on that map to take a look in more detail. But the goal here really is to meet the increasing recreational, cultural, and ecological demands on parks and public spaces in priority areas. So similar to the last question that we asked, which of the following amenities would you most like to see in parks located in high density areas in downtown? We're asking you to choose up to 3. The options we have listed here are playgrounds, multi-use plaza, open lawn area again, off-leash dog run, gardens again, pollinator or community, seating and picnic areas, adjacent retail or restaurant uses, sports courts, and cultural spaces. And the reason we're asking this question is because we know that there are different needs in some high density areas, specifically the downtown, where you have a much higher use during the daytime and maybe a lower use on the weekends. So what types of amenities are important in those higher growth areas? Right now, we've got a really good split on the screen, about 23% with multi-use plaza at the top, but then, adjacent restaurant and retail uses, seating areas, off-leash dog runs, gardens, all ranking very high on the list. And Josh in the chat box mentioned nature play, so I just wanted to give a shout out to that one. Thank you for adding that. So the next focus area we want to touch on is resilience, habitat, restoration, and waterways. Really thinking about bringing nature into the city through the park space and protecting the nature along those corridors. So the goal here is to cultivate an accessible and resilient network of wildlife habitat corridors, waterways, and recreation and protective areas to prepare for an uncertain future and to expand public stewardship. So next slide, please. So when we think about waterways and resilience and habitat, we've asked you to rank the following criteria from most important to least important for resilient habitat, restoration, and waterways. So again, similar to a previous question, rank in order. The first thing we have on here is provides continuity for wildlife corridors, protects the floodplain and for future development, reduces the urban heat island effect, protects critical or unique species and habitats, and creates a system of green natural spaces throughout the urban core. One thing to note for those who don't necessarily know what urban heat island effect is, that is the phenomenon that our urban areas get warmer because we have less shade, we have less nature. So more cover of vegetation really helps to bring down that heat island effect that happens when the sun is shining on spaces that are impervious. So rising to the top here right now is a system of green natural spaces throughout the urban core, followed closely by the urban heat island effect reduction. And keep those votes coming in. They remain the same here. Protects the floodplain from future development, wildlife corridor continuity. And it looks again like a system of green natural spaces throughout the urban core is a priority here. So next slide, please. All right, mountain parks is our next focus area. And for those that don't know, Denver has over 14,000 acres of mountain parks that provide a respite from the hustle of the city and protect natural habitat. So a goal around mountain parks is to provide accessible destination parks that focus on outdoor recreation or education and ecological preservation. And I think one thing we've heard through our focus group conversations, our technical partners conversations, is that mountain parks really, the goal of mountain parks is to really make sure that we're reaching out and providing equitable access, again, to our entire community. So how do we make sure that we're providing opportunities to those who don't necessarily currently have access to those parks? So as an acquisition strategy, really focusing on that equity of access is important. So next slide. So the question here is, how would you prioritize the following criteria for mountain parks? To do this, you can just slide the bars under each of these statements to indicate either lower or higher priority. The first one is provide continuity for wildlife corridors. A second is increase accessibility for recreation and visitorship for all Denver residents. Third is have unique or diverse topography. And fourth is to protect historical or cultural assets. So, and right now, visitorship for all Denver residents is ranking very high. Everything's ranking pretty high. Protecting historical or cultural assets and continuity for wildlife corridors also high on the list. But again, none of these is really ranking low at all. So thank you for the responses here. And then finally, facilities. When we think about parks and recreation, we don't think about facilities very often. But when we talk about facilities in this plan, we're really talking about two types of facilities. One is recreation facilities, which includes recreation centers and pools, so built facilities that people go to visit. But we're also talking about parks maintenance facilities in this focus area. They're critical to the enjoyment of parks to make sure that we have quality spaces and the appropriate maintenance throughout the city to maintain those spaces. So the goal here is to provide land and buildings throughout the city for diverse recreation opportunities, as well as accessible and efficient parks maintenance. As I mentioned, maintenance facilities are critical for maintaining the system. We don't often see them. They tend to be in the background, but they're very important. Maintenance facilities and acquisitions for such facilities are critical for maintaining and operating an equitable, sustainable, and resilient parks and recreation system. And then when we think about recreation facilities, question for you here, and the results are not going to appear on your screen. We're asking an open-ended question about what amenities or programs would encourage you to visit indoor or outdoor facilities more often. So please take a moment to consider those amenities that might encourage you to visit indoor or outdoor recreation facilities more often, and put those in the Mentimeter presentation. And we'll give folks a few minutes. We don't want to move you forward. So Hadley, let's take maybe 30 more seconds for folks to add their ideas. So again, these are recreation centers. These are pools. These may be sports facilities with concessions. Anything that really draws you to a space to encourage you to go out and recreate in one of Parks and Recreation's facilities. All right, just a few more seconds. All right, I think we can move on, Hadley. A comment from Amy in the chat that she loves and misses the excellent selection of the fitness classes at rec centers. That I think we're all missing a lot in this time of COVID, and that connection between people is an important thing. So I'm going to turn it back over here to Luke to talk about next steps.
Great, thank you, Chris, and thanks for taking us through the survey. Before diving into next steps and just opening up to general questions and answers, if it wasn't clear from the beginning, the topics and the questions we just asked as part of the survey were informed by previous engagement, both of you all, the public, our technical partners, our technical staff and subject matter experts, and the feedback that we're getting tonight will ultimately inform the final recommendations and criteria in the final strategic acquisition plan. So we're going to be integrating the results from the survey, but also tonight's meeting, the feedback we're receiving now, into that final plan. A draft of that plan will be going before the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board on May 10th, and that will be a public hearing. And then we'll be presenting the plan in final form again to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board in June. And the draft plan, the final plan, and the meeting materials for both of those meetings will be posted at least 30 days in advance for the public to review. Next slide, please, Hadley. Great. So now this at the point of our meeting for just general Q&A regarding the strategic acquisition plan. Feel free to ask questions either through Menti, through the Zoom chat box, or using the raise your hand function or icon on Zoom.
And Luke, I'll jump in really fast.
Sure.
If you are using Menti right now, you might be seeing some demographic questions. Those are all optional. We're not going to be displaying them on here, but just so you know, those are helpful for us to make sure that we are reaching everybody we can in the city and to see if we have any gaps in our outreach. So optional questions on your own time, but just so you know, they may be showing up on your screen.
Great. Thanks, Laura. So again, the floor is open. Menti, the chat box, the raise your hand function. The project team's happy to answer any questions that you all may have. Yeah, and if Menti isn't working well for asking questions, feel free to use the chat box, or again, raise your hand, and Laura will unmute you, and we'll do the best we can to answer your question.
So Maggie has a question. She asks, what part of Denver do you anticipate purchasing land in? Kathy, do you want to take that one on?
Sure. So we're really looking across the entire Denver system. As we went through those focus areas, we talked about equity, 10-minute walk or roll, our waterways, our habitat areas. We also talked about mountain parks. So really across our entire system, we're trying to use those focus areas to really help us hone in on where we need new park and recreation assets. And so, so we're really using that as our guide to figure out where we should target looking.
All right, and it looks like we have two raised hands. I'll start with Remedy Permaculture. You should be unmuted. Oh,
Great.
there we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Fabulous. Great. Well, I also typed what I had to say, but I was excited to have the option to be able to speak like a human. So thank you for that. And I just want to thank you for hosting this meeting. It feels so good to be able to be involved. And I really love seeing the focus on resiliency and sustainability and habitat protection. And I just want to say that I have a permaculture design business here in Denver, and we focus on pollinator habitats using native plants that are waterwise and low maintenance. And I'm wondering how we can get involved and who we should reach out to.
Thanks for sharing your interest. The Denver Parks and Recreation Department, we work with quite a few contractors. We have bidding processes and RFPs and things. And if you'd like, if you're able to send us your email or your contact information, we can make sure to get you more information about those.
I'll put the email in the chat.
Okay, fabulous. Thanks a lot, Kathleen and Laura.
And then I'll go ahead and unmute James, and then I think there's one more question from the chat.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you very much for the presentation and the opportunity to voice our opinions. I think that's extremely important. Our neighborhood in particular is just kicking off its neighborhood planning initiative. And I was wondering if you could speak to that, and under that sort of umbrella and that activity, how can the strategic acquisition plan play hand in hand with sort of some of the feedback that we get in our neighborhood planning initiative? Thanks.
Thanks, James. That's a great point. Denver Parks and Recreation has been involved in the neighborhood planning initiatives. Those are led by Community Planning and Development, but our Denver Parks and Recreation staff has been involved in them. And especially there is a feature of the neighborhood planning initiatives called Quality of Life. And that is really where parks, open space, and recreation falls into. And we are very interested in talking to the community at that neighborhood planning level about what is their needs in the system in terms of quantity of parks, types of amenities, types of recreational programming, need for access to nature, all of those types of things. So, so your feedback and the feedback from those communities is really important, and we are able to use that information to help us hone in even further as we look at our acquisition focus areas, having an even better idea of directly what would benefit local communities.
And Kathy, I would add that in this plan, one of the recommended criteria is that acquisitions support the implementation of other community plans, whether it's game plan, the neighborhood planning initiatives, Denver Moves, any other plans that really have an opportunity to bring the park system to the collective benefit of the rest of the city. So that is embedded in the recommended criteria that we're moving forward with.
Awesome. We have a question about Cook Park Rec Center. Do you anticipate making improvements to this park, to Cook Park near the rec center? Luke, do you know about that?
I don't off the top of my head. Kathy, do you?
I know that we have some projects going on around Cook Park Rec Center. We have a new playground, basketball court, and some walks that are actually, I believe they've just recently finished the design process, and we'll be moving ahead to construction. I don't have the exact timeline offhand, but I believe it's either on our website or we can follow up with you to get you that information.
All right, so we've got Alex wanting to ask a question, so I'm going to unmute Alex.
Hi, thank you. My question was on what parts of the plan make sure that there's a meaningful acquisition. I think of examples where there could be opportunities to purchase small pocket parks that could enable the 5-minute walk or roll, but that wouldn't really get utilized because of how small they would be. So I wonder, how is that going to be balanced with like making meaningful connecting acquisitions that can make the park system better as a whole, rather than just like kind of small things just to meet the target?
Thanks for that question. With the polling that we just went through, that actually represents the criteria that we're looking at to really try and figure out if an acquisition is meaningful and will add value to our park system and to that local neighborhood. So for example, as we looked at the 10-minute walk or roll to a park, we had questions about connectivity and what we're very interested to know, what are the most valuable ways to get to a park? How are people accessing them? As we talked about, I think in both the equity and in the downtown polling questions that we talked about the different kinds of amenities that might be in a park. And that really helps us figure out if an acquisition would make sense as we look at the size and the shape of a property. And we're really trying to figure out what can, if we were to buy it, what could we put there? It's really helpful to have that evaluation criteria of could it accommodate sport courts, playgrounds, cultural space, pollinator gardens, fitness stations? So that's your feedback on that is really valuable to us to help us make sure we're getting quality park spaces as we grow our system.
Thank you.
All right, so up next we have Woody. Go ahead and unmute you.
Hi, thanks. I'm just following up on a chat that I put in a few minutes ago. The 155-acre Park Hill Golf Course land is protected by a city-owned conservation easement, which is supposed to protect it for the purpose of open space and recreation forever. And the PRAB voted last fall unanimously, almost unanimously, to recommend to the manager of Parks and Recreation that the city acquire the property for a fabulous public park. And the land could be purchased based on its fair market value now as encumbered by the easement for probably no more than $5 million, which would be an incredible bargain for Denver taxpayers and the city and for future generations, given the fact that the city last year, I think, spent $5 million to purchase 2 acres in southeast Denver for a small park. $5 million for 155 acres, preserving that open space forever is incredible. And the city right now is involved in a planning process that is directed toward trying to break the easement and to support the West Side Investment Partners effort to develop the property. And I'm wondering why that's going on. And I urge this acquisition plan to state that a high priority consistent with the PRAB recommendation is to acquire that land for its fair market value, which should be no more than about $5 million.
Thanks for mentioning Park Hill Golf Course. I know a lot of folks are very interested in that property. Community planning and development is leading a community visioning process right now to talk with the neighborhood in the city, city residents to really figure out what is their vision for the future of that space. The city has committed that if the community wants to see some sort of reimagining or reuse of the site, a substantial park or open space would be a component of a potential future scenario. But right now we are waiting for that visioning process to complete so that we can hear from the community and what their vision is.
So up next, we've got Marianne. If you want, I can unmute you. Are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's a little quiet.
I wanted to know if there's plans in park planning to make accommodation for these little pop-up homes and camping areas for the homeless people. And I'll also throw in here that I am in the Loretta Heights area, and I myself have been very pleased with how Westside has worked with the community in planning development of that parcel.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. Kathy, did you hear all of that?
I believe so. I'll try to answer it best I can, but let me know if I did miss something. Feel free to repeat part of your question. But I think that you were asking about if there are currently capital plans to create pop-up housing for people experiencing homelessness. Is that correct that was your question?
Yes.
I see. Okay. Offhand, I am not aware from our parks capital planning work, which is the team that I'm on. I'm not aware of any capital funds that we have for that, but I know that there are quite a few city agencies working with people experiencing homelessness. And so that's something that we could potentially try and follow up to get you more information about the city's efforts on that.
Okay.
I don't see any additional raised hands. Are there any questions that came in from Mentimeter? Oh, I see one more raised hands, and we did hear from Woody already, so just let me see if there's one more, if there's anything else that came in on Mentimeter first. Chris?
I'm not seeing the Mentimeter. That Hadley, do you have anything? Hadley says nothing on Mentimeter.
Okay, well, then it looks like we have Woody and James, and yep, so Woody and James, we'll take Woody first.
Okay, let me just briefly respond to what was said a few minutes ago at the Park Hill Golf Course. The city's, quote, visioning process, end of quote, is totally slanted toward development. And it totally ignores the fact that there is a perpetual open space conservation easement on the land. And the state statute that governs conservation easement would require a court order saying that it's impossible to continue to fulfill the open space and recreational purposes of the easement before the easement can be terminated. So I just want to comment that the city is spending a lot of taxpayer money on a plan for land that cannot be legally developed, and it's got the cart before the horse.
Thank you, Woody. James and then Daryl. So James, I'll unmute you.
Okay, thank you for that, and thanks for taking a second question from me. And this one's a bit of a basic question. What type of land can be acquired by Denver Parks and Recreation? Specifically, could a underutilized street be acquired and turned into a linear park that would increase connectivity, particularly pedestrian connectivity between parks? Is that something that the city can do, or if that street, for instance, is vacated, does it become the property of the state? And is that something that is essentially therefore impossible to do or more complicated to accomplish?
Kathy, do you want to take the first question on utilization of right-of-way for park space, and I could take the second, James's second
Sure.
question?
Sure. In terms of utilizing right-of-way for park space or park type space, we actually do have a recent example of that that's currently being developed. The Arkins Promenade is actually an example where Denver Parks and Recreation also coordinated with our Department of Transportation and Infrastructure to really take that right-of-way and turn it into a linear park space. It's currently under construction. It's just north of the new Arkins Park that opened last summer. We also have an example of the 39th Avenue Greenway, which also just opened in November, I believe. And that was a former rail line that's also been turned into green space that people can utilize with opportunities for play and seating. So those are a couple examples of where we have done that, and the possibility of finding additional opportunities for something like that, I think is something that Denver Parks and Recreation is interested in exploring. And I'll turn it over to Luke to answer the rest of your question.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. And James, I'm going to be pretty general here, but typically with vacation of right-of-way, once right-of-way is vacated, the land goes to adjoining property owners. That doesn't happen in all cases. There's a lot of factors and details that go into it, specifically kind of the history of that right-of-way, things on title, et cetera. But generally speaking, when right-of-way is vacated, it goes to the adjoining property owners. Does that answer all of your question?
Yes, it does. That was my suspicion on the second part. So yes, that does answer my question. Thank you.
Great. So I'll go ahead and move on to Daryl.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I want to thank the team. I think these meetings have been fantastic, and the facilitation and Chris's your work on Menti has been great with the ability to answer questions. My question is on for land acquisition. Has there been part of your process looking at strategic partnerships? So, for example, land that DPS has, or XL, or any of the larger entities that Denver Parks and Rec engages with, in which you may not have to purchase, but you may be able to have a strategic partnership. Is that also included in this visioning process?
Absolutely. I think partnerships are critical and provide a great opportunity out there to leverage land that might be functioning like a park space, or other dollars from interested partners. So working with other agencies, like you had mentioned, also opportunities to work with nonprofits or other groups is a big part of our acquisition strategy. As we have these 6 focus areas developed that we talked about. And so as we adopt the plan and then try to pursue acquisition opportunities in those 6 focus areas, we will absolutely be keeping an eye out for partners.
Great, so I'm gonna actually pull Christopher next since we haven't heard from him yet.
Hey everybody, this is Chris Hawkins with the Nature Conservancy, and sorry, I'm in the middle of some childcare, so if you hear the demand for trucks, that's not actually me. Just wanted to ask, one of the, I think, opportunities that was definitely, I think, considered, at least when the 2018 2A funding came around, was that without a sunset, there is an opportunity to think about the funding, in out years as well, and the opportunity to possibly, finance against that that sustained revenue source, and then, use that to prioritize greater acquisition earlier when it might be cheaper or more strategic. So just love to hear, and I do apologize, I was late to the meeting, but would love to hear if there's any kind of that thought in the plan or in the strategy as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for your question. So I believe, if you just want to clarify quickly, are we thinking about different funding mechanisms, utilizing either our primary source of funding, the Parks Legacy 2A funds, or potential other future funding opportunities, and looking at different, again, funding strategies, financing mechanisms to kind of stretch and leverage current dollars?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, to be specific, you could imagine being able to, issue a bond based on that revenue source that might allow you to make, cheaper acquisitions in the present, rather than having to do kind of pay as you go, with that funding revenue annually. So curious just to hear if that's been part of the strategy.
Yeah, no, and thanks again for the question. And so one part of the plan will be kind of looking at, what are our tools in the toolbox, both kind of legal and real estate tools, but also funding tools. And in the case of creative or innovative funding mechanisms or strategies, just throughout the course of this planning process, we won't be able to completely flesh those out, but at least at a high level, we are kind of identifying different funding strategies and mechanisms that, again, we may not be able to completely flesh out over the next couple months before the plan's completed, but we'll certainly kind of continue to look at and assess and work on together with other city agencies, in particular, city attorney's office and our budget and management office as well.
Great, so I'm gonna actually pull Alex. I know you've been waiting for a little bit.
Awesome, thank you. My question actually builds off of James and also brings in a question around health and safety. There's some areas in my neighborhood, one of the high needs area, and there's areas that are low lying with natural waterways buried underneath the street that are covered in areas. Those areas are higher risk of flooding, the homes in that area. I was wondering if areas like that where there could be potential risk to homeowners, like health and safety concerns with flooding, if those are more likely to be acquired as part of the plan? Is there a concern for that as part of this?
We have been coordinating with our parks as we've been developing the plan and the different criteria. We've been coordinating with our park staff that work on waterways and especially resiliency around our waterways. And we've also been reaching out to other agencies such as the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure's wastewater team, the Mile High Flood District. And then we also have been referencing our Office of Emergency Management and their plans. So we've been trying to coordinate across the different agencies, especially the ones that deal with waterways and ones that are prone to flooding. So that is part of that resiliency focus area.
Yeah, and Kathy, I would add to that you mentioned the 39th Avenue Greenway. That is also a flooding mitigation project. So the plan, as we mentioned, does reference the criteria reference alignment with other city plans, and that would certainly include urban drainage and mile high flood.
Great. We've got Lynn with a question.
Hello. A couple of things. This is related to Park Hill. Given the 6 criteria, and as Christopher brought up, the bonding capability and how we've seen large parks so overcrowded during COVID, and the need and the desire to have bigger parks, and the comments earlier about not creating too many small parks. I just wondered if somebody could say or tell us what is standing in the way of us making Park Hill a park. A lot of people voted for 2A in anticipation of that becoming a park, and I just never can quite understand what is standing in the way of that becoming a park.
With that community visioning process that's ongoing right now, we're really waiting to see the results from that, to see what the community does want for that area. So I understand that will wrap up this summer. So we're staying tuned to see what we hear from the community.
So the community could choose a grocery store over a park? I just can't wrap my mind around, is it money that we don't have enough to buy that as a park, or because we're the park acquisition people, and I just can't understand why we're not advocating for buying that.
Again, we're really trying to see what the community has to say to let the city know what they would like for that area. I understand there is a commitment that if the community wants to reimagine the site, that a significant park or open space would be part of that reimagining. But we are staying tuned to see what the results are.
Yeah, and we just have a few minutes left, so I wanted to get to Fran.
Hi, I agree with Lynn. It's kind of weird that we have the Park Hill thing doing its own thing, and then we have the strategic plan. Somehow I would like to see those merge, so we can try to figure out what exactly is happening, because everything we get on PRAB is that people want to see this turn into a park. So my 2 cents.
Thanks, Fran. All right. Chris, Kathy, I think we have got all of the hands raised, and I don't see any lingering questions in the chat.
Well, thank you, Laura. I want to share my thanks with everybody who joined the call tonight. Appreciate the conversation and your interest in this project. We think it's very important. To that end, we are going to be opening up the survey that you took to the entire Denver community today. Actually, I think it was posted 2 days ago. We would encourage you to talk to your friends, your colleagues, your communities about going and completing that survey, learning again what the plan is doing. There are links in the Zoom chat to those surveys. So we do have the surveys in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. So please share that information with, again, your friends, your families, your community members. We want to make sure that we are reflecting the diversity of our community in this plan. So getting this plan out to as many people as we can, the survey out to as many people as we can is important to us. So again, I think on behalf of Design Workshop, thank you, everybody. And Kathy, do you want to just close it out?
Yeah, thank you all so much for your time this evening. We really appreciate your feedback and input. And please do share the survey with your family, your friends, and your networks. We appreciate your time.